Well, besides the lack of money these days, I finished up a master's in creative writing and English literature and decided that even though I loved being a scholar and analyzing stories and learning theories, that what interested me most was the content in itself and the literary techniques used to form a story. So an MA in creative writing essentially gets you nowhere because you need to go on to an MFA, and I figured why not apply to the best. BU has one of the most reputable programs in the country. I would say top 10, and the 1-year status of it was hard to beat as well. My mother wrote, and she's a hairstylist, and she's also a bodyguard. So she fills me with tons of stories on a regular basis. But when I was a child, she was taking writing classes at a community college, and so I would go with her to the college or sit at home and write with her while she was doing her homework. And it was just sort of always instilled in me to be creative and write a poem if you feel that way. Oh yeah. Yeah, I started taking classes at the same college that my mother took classes at, in the College for Kids program. And it was, I was torn between wanting to be an actress and wanting to be a writer. So I went down the writing route and would write poems in the 3rd grade to my teachers. And I remember in kindergarten, actually, this is how far back it goes, we were reading a story about a dog who, ran away from home and needed to come back home. And we were also learning how to write stories. And one of the rules was never start a sentence with the word end. And in the book, the author wrote a sentence with the word end. And I thought, you could break these rules, what else could you do? And so that really started my affair with it. When you grow up wanting to be a poet, you don't really actually think you're going to grow up to be a poet. You think that, am I good? Is this a career I can actually make for myself? So when I was in college, I decided I needed to just stick to the literature route. I never wanted to get my PhD and go that way until I met Philip Lopate, who is an acclaimed nonfiction writer, and he sort of became my mentor. And even though he teaches prose, he made my poetry more effective just by really, I think it was really just believing in me. And I think that's what it takes, somebody to believe in the story that you're telling and make you want to tell more. So after I had a class with him, I continued writing until I landed myself here. And my family, I would say. My family, who is unique and yet not unique at the same time. An average American family who struggled with alcoholism, and then stepfathers and stepbrothers, and relocating, and Brooklyn, and all of New York, I thought was inspirational. And then my past, who, or rather my grandparents were Holocaust survivors, and I thought that I needed to share their story because when I started teaching in a community college, I was overwhelmed with ESL students. So I was in remedial courses, I was teaching remedial courses, but it was really ESL. And none of them had any knowledge of World War II. And it crumbled me inside, and I thought, why read a textbook? And let them read a story of a 2nd-generation survivor who sees what hate can actually do to the world. And so that's where the core of all of my poetry and all of my stories come from. Mostly Persian, and or they would associate with themselves as Persian, I don't know. You could still technically call it Persia, but Persian and Eastern European. Well, I think just talking about it in a classroom, having this liberal arts education and being introduced to it, and being able to talk about government and war openly, and have, I had a Palestinian and an Israeli in a class in which we discussed war, and there was so much anger, so much anger that I was sort of a mediator between the two. But at the end of the class, they dropped their differences and decided it is what it is, but we're here together. And so it was a truly powerful moment, and I think that any liberal arts education, that's what you aim for. My mother. I always write poems for my mother. I dedicated my first thesis to her. It said, for my mother, always the best character, because she is. And I think that when I send her my poems, even if they're in the roughest draft, and I know that they're going to improve in 3 more weeks, 4 more weeks, if she doesn't get it, or she says it's too easy, then there's no fooling anyone else. So.
If she says it's too easy, what do you mean by that?
If she could see where it's going from the first line.
And you don't want that
I
in your
don't
poetry.
want that. No tears for the reader, no tears for the writer, no tears for the reader. And if you're not surprised to where the poem takes you, then the reader won't be surprised. And that's the difference between poetry and fiction, I think. You know, they always say, let go where the poem takes you, and you never really understand, with they being the professors, how they mean this. And so you sit down and you write a poem that you think is going to be about, let's say, your grandmother killing a chicken, and it turns out to be about war, because it takes you a while to understand your feelings and why you're feeling a certain way. I think the words come first, and then you have to make sure that you put the feelings through the words. So a poem can start with a single word, but it's not going to be an effective poem if there's no drive for it. I think it really depends. For instance, in Rosanna Warren's class, we have a provocation every week. So last week we had to write a verse drama. Now, a verse drama can be anything we wanted it to be, but it had to be a specific type of poem. So when it comes to that, I think verse drama, Shakespeare, or any other literary talent that has mastered the art, and I'll read a few things from them to get myself in the mood. But I think you could find poetry in the everyday. Robert Pinsky has a task for us to do, and it's the first thing your hand touches, you write a poem about. So you could write a poem about the first thing your hand touches, or you could write a poem in form, or you could write it because you're feeling so much love for an object or person, whatever it goes. I always need a book by me and a cup of coffee. Those are the 2 things that keep me going. Well, I teach 18, 17-year-olds poetry, so I tell them to just keep with it. That writing is rewriting, and most 18-year-olds, most 16-year-olds, I did when I was younger, you write a poem and you think that's it and you put it away. But if you continue to read that poem, you continue to read your words, and you rewrite, and you get to the heart of it, and you make it really clear, and you put more pressure on everything you're saying, then you have something better each time. I hope that when someone picks up my poem, they feel comforted, and that somebody went through what they're going through. That they could feel a sort of connection to whatever the theme may be. But there's always a resonating feeling of love, because I don't believe in the way the world is going now, and I don't believe in all this hate and war and protesting after one thing that leads to 1,000 things. I think if we all just stepped back and observed what we're doing and how we're communicating, then it would all come down to love and how much we just want to be understood. So I hope that if somebody reads my poem in 15 years, or a collection of my poems in 15 years, they feel that somebody understood what they were going through.